Joining me now, host of the Andrea Kaye radio show, Andrea Kaye, and Democratic strategist and director of business for DS Political, Kevin Walling. Andrea, Kevin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Liz.
All right, Kevin, let me start with you with this question of the day today. You heard me talk about it in the introduction, but President Trump's budget plan has now been panned from both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats alike. But at the same time, Kevin, our nation is $20 trillion in debt, the most it's ever been. How can we practically reduce our debt, pay off or reduce our deficit as well if we don't cut spending like this?
It's a great question, Liz. The amazing thing is President Trump has actually, as you just said, united Republicans and Democrats together in disgust of this budget proposal that he's put forward. You're right in that we are $20 trillion in debt. $6 trillion of that is held by foreign governments, including China and Japan, as majority stakeholders in that debt. But the key thing with this budget proposal that the president has released is it adds $600 billion to our already ballooning deficit. This budget doesn't get under control whatsoever our ballooning national debt. Both parties are to blame for that debt, and this president is not serious whatsoever in reducing that debt at all over time or in this new budget that he's put forward.
And Andrea, let me pivot to you because the Democrats' criticism of this budget plan, it's somewhat different than Kevin just articulated. I mean, what they're saying is if you're poor, if you're old, if you're low income, this budget is not for you because it's going to take away what they consider to be vital programs. But we heard Mulvaney and in the video at the beginning of the segment, he said some of these programs have good names. They would be great if they worked, but we really don't have proof that they contribute any results to our society. So, I mean, why keep them?
Well, right. You know, in general, don't we understand as Americans when we're running our own family budgets that if we have so much debt that we can never afford to pay it off, we're likely to go bankrupt, and therefore we have to start making some decisions about what we're going to do with our family budgets. And you know what? Maybe it sounds great to take a family trip to Hawaii too, but you know what? Maybe we need to think about whether or not we're going to be able to pay the mortgage, and that's kind of where we're at. And when you look at $3 billion for some of these community programs, and then we're not even sure exactly how much of that Meals on Wheels even actually gets. So, you know, it's just typical hype from the left to want to start saying that the Republican Party wants to toss Granny off a cliff, starve her to death, and then feed, you know, children dirty water. It's nonsense. If you really start getting inside some of the budgets and some of the agencies as well as the programs they want to cut, it makes you wonder why they ever existed in the first place. Maybe we should all rally around that.
And Kevin, let me turn back to you. I mean, how do we balance our budget if we don't start with these, you know, rather severe cuts, maybe even perhaps going further? How in the next decade or in our lifetime, so that we don't pass this down to our children and our grandchildren, how do we get our budget balanced?
Well, I don't think we do it on the backs of the most vulnerable. And I think it is typical of the left to care for the most indigent, the most poor, poverty-stricken in this country. You know, the scary thing to me is 20% of children in this great country of ours live in poverty. They go to bed hungry every single night, and Republicans just last week voted to cut $40 billion from the National Food Assistance Program. So again, we can plan our budgets, we can budget accordingly, and again, it's important to recognize that we cannot do that, though, on the backs of the most vulnerable in this country. We've got to prioritize lifting everybody up and not slashing those most in need.
Right. Theoretically, I don't disagree with you. I just think sometimes, you know, these programs, it's like Mick Mulvaney said again, let me go back to that. You know, these programs have great names, but if they don't result in what we want them to do, if they don't actually help people, lift people out of poverty or give them a helping hand when they are out of luck or in a hard time, I mean, shouldn't we reallocate that money? Shouldn't we eliminate those programs and give that money to something else?
I think cutting seniors off from food benefits, I think cutting young people off of tuition assistance, those things that would happen overnight if this budget passes, is not the way to do that. We need to have a real conversation about priorities in this country. We don't need to add another $50 billion to our defense spending as this budget wants to promote. We spend already more than the top 8 countries down the road from us on defense spending. So let's not look at increasing our defense spending at a time when we don't need that kind of funding for our level of defense. Let's not look at putting another $3 billion towards building that wall on the southern border while our children are going to bed hungry. I think we can have that realistic conversation in this country if we come to it with a shared set of values. And this budget that the Trump administration has put forward with the OMB director, Mick Mulvaney, doesn't hold up to our values as Americans.
And
If I could-
Andrea, let me pivot right to you. I mean, that's a fairly serious allegation to make, that we're taking food out of the mouths of seniors and letting children go to bed hungry while we're wasting money on defending our nation. Is that the case? Is that what happens with this budget?
Well, first of all, let me even backtrack all the way back to them saying that typical of the left to care about seniors and the most vulnerable. Wasn't it President Obama and the Obama administration that took billions of dollars away from Medicare and from seniors in order to fund the income redistribution scheme of Obamacare? And if we want to talk
expanded
about
Medicare under President Obama.
I let you speak. If you would let me finish. And when we want to talk about priorities, our nation's #1 priority is supposed to be the protection of its citizens. And I certainly don't think that when we have $20 trillion in debt, that it is my priority to help fund anybody's college tuition. I put myself through school working 5 nights a week as a waitress and paid off my own student loans with no help from anybody else. Our priority should be on national defense. And at a time in which the scourge of radical Islam in nation states that have aimed to want to destroy us is only increasing and has done so with the Obama administration, we absolutely don't have any choice but to increase our national defense. And getting back to cuts to meal services, $227 million Health and Human Services, and they can't even track exactly how much of that goes to Meals on Wheels. I don't think cutting back 10% of that is really going to leave America starving.
And Kevin, go ahead and get the last word here. We're almost out of time, but go ahead and respond.
When we as a country spend more than 8 times what China spends on defense, when we spend that kind of ballooning budgets with defense, it's not a matter of keeping us, not keeping us safe. Our military does a great job of that. It's a matter of prioritizing what's important in this country with an eye to our values.
Right, and I would just add one final comment, and part of this defense spending is keeping safe the men and women who keep us safe, giving them the resources that they need. That's something vitally important I think a lot of people forget about. But Andrea...